Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 2. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. As laughable as I find the alien and UFO phenomenon, even more laughable than that is this national divorce civil war discussion, I guess. I don't even know if you could call it that. I don't even know if it's a discussion. Position, this energy of fear and anger and discord, complete and total nonsense. Not only is it nonsense, I believe that this country has never been more united on more issues than we have been in the last 2 to 3 years. Most of the separation is in identity politics and is in really inconsequential issues that are very profitable and that keep us from focusing on the real issues. In this episode, we will discuss the fact that this nation is nowhere close to a national divorce, much less a civil war, that all of this talk is basically for profit, and that the people who are the proponents of such talk likely don't even believe in it. It's just for the money. And to finish, it's all within our grasp to make the changes. Gerrymandered political districts are a sign of our own weakness. Hashtag vote against the incumbent. We can have a bloodless coup and an entirely new government in 6 short years. Thank you for all the support. I've actually had a number of people come out and ask me, A, where are the new episodes? And B, thank you for the new episodes. Does make me feel good that there are some people out there listening and are actually looking forward to new content. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, thumbs up, distribute, comment. There's a Patreon page. Yes, there is. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support the channel. It would really help me out. I'm not going to beg for money, but I'm not going to not beg for money either. This podcast is not self-sustaining, so to the extent that you do want to hear additional content and maybe even one day see me produce some video, please support on Patreon so that I can outsource those things because I'm not that good at doing it. Now, on to the main attraction.
Act 1 Talk of Civil War in 21st Century America is nonsensical clickbait.
Naive as it may sound, I'm very optimistic about the future of this country, and I'm very optimistic about the future of the younger generations. The so-called division in this country is manufactured. It is manufactured by the people that profit from that division. Who is that? Namely, the legacy media, namely, politicians. This talk of there being a civil war in the United States of America in the 21st century, that differences are so irreconcilable that people would actually take up arms against one another in the United States in the 21st century is ludicrous. It's absolutely absurd. And I don't believe that most people believe this to be true, that most people believe it to be a reality. I believe that when the question is asked of them in the right frame, they give the right answer. What do I mean by that? Again, there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of profit in division. And if the media, if there are different types of special interests that are polling the American people about the state of affairs, politics, social issues, religion, they're looking for division. And if you go looking for division, you can craft questions in order to find it. Let me illustrate my thinking here by way of a question to you, dear listener. What are the battle lines to be drawn in this new civil war? Who is going to be fighting? Who is going to be fighting against whom? By way of the media, politicians, pundits, you're getting red versus blue states. The red versus blue paradigm. As I've stated numerous times on this podcast, there is no such thing as red versus blue anymore. You may have some states that you could call solidly red, You may have some states that you could call solidly blue. But many of the states in this country now are becoming purple. And as I've said numerous times on this podcast, that is a good thing. Why? Identity politics separates us. Many people are now pushing aside identity politics. They're waking up to what this scheme is. Obama voters voted for Trump. Trump voters voted for Biden. Identity politics will only carry a politician, a political party, even the media so far. And people will then, out of frustration, because again, as I've said numerous times on this podcast, there truly is no difference in substance between the political parties. That's right, dear listener. You're not getting anything of substance from a Democrat that you're not going to get from a Republican. When people wake up to that, they will just vote for the other candidate. They will vote out the incumbent. That's why I tried to start a hashtag last year, vote against the incumbent. There's no point in getting involved in identity politics if what it leads to in substance is the exact same political outcomes as you would have had gotten from the other political candidate, from the other political party. So who's going to take up arms in this new political paradigm, in the identity politics paradigm? Are states really going to secede from the United States of America over identity politics? Is the state of Texas going to leave the Union over identity politics? Is the state of New York, is the state of California going to leave the Union over identity politics? What is going to be the battle cry? Who's going to fight whom? Anyone that decides to take up arms against the United States federal government in the 21st century is dead. That's a dead person. And are the people who are really advocating for such a secession, for national divorce, are these the type of people who would actually pick up a rifle and exchange rifle rounds with anyone? No. The country has been divided to the point that it took up arms against itself, and it had an issue that was so divisive, slavery, that warranted as much. What is that issue in the 21st century? Is one going to argue to me, maintain to me, that woke politics is so divisive that we're going to take up arms against one another? That the people so opposed to woke politics, the people so in support of woke politics, are going to actually exchange rifle rounds with one another? The advocates for these two, what appear to be diametrically opposed positions, they aren't certainly going to start shooting at one another. Though they may advocate for you and I to do it, they're not going to do it. It's a sales pitch, dear listener. It's a sales pitch, plain and simple. Identity politics sells. Again, it's easy. It goes viral quickly. It animates us, usually in anger and frustration and separation. And most importantly, it keeps us glued to our devices, whether that be a television, whether that be our phone, social media. What do any of these legacy media outlets want? What do any of these social media companies want? They want your attention. That is what they want more than anything. They're not going to be able to warrant the type of money that they're making because they won't be able to get the type of money from their advertisers if they can't keep you locked in. And what keeps you locked in? Separation. And how are they going to manifest, how are they going to manufacture that separation in short order? Identity politics. Not just identity politics such that the country is actually at a dire strait. There's an impasse that if it is not solved, the country is going to crumble. And what is that impasse? It's whether or not someone promotes green technology as part of their corporate culture, whether or not the Department of Transportation has enough diversity in its contracting crews. That is not to say these may not be important issues that you care about. Are you willing to pick up a rifle and exchange rifle rounds with someone over that? No. No, you're not. No, I'm not. It's not an issue that warrants a war. And the people advocating for as much are doing so because they don't want us to focus on the issues where we actually agree. I believe there is much more agreement in the United States of America in the 21st century than there is disagreement. I believe that most of us realize that there are a few key problems that we refuse as a government, as a polity, to address. And most people agree on those issues. Are prescription drug prices reasonable? Is the fact that Medicare is paying such outrageous prices for prescription drugs, is that the cause of this huge inflated budget that we have for Social Security? Our defense budget is close to $1 trillion a year. Did that land in 1 year? The media made a huge deal over Biden's Build Back Better plan, which was basically $1.3 trillion over 10 years. Our defense budget is now close to $1 trillion a year. Ask most people if that's reasonable, and they'll tell you no. Is that part of the lexicon of this huge divide in this country? No. People don't disagree over those issues, they agree. We may not agree on all of the solutions to those issues, but we have certainly, I believe, agreed that they are a problem. And that's the first step. It's not what are the solutions, it's properly identifying the problem. When you have so little margin between the political parties in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, in state legislatures, we aren't that divided, folks. We aren't that divided. And to the extent that we are voting for one political party or the other, you're seeing more and more people wake up. You're seeing more and more people say, it doesn't matter whether or not they are an R or a D on that ballot. If they do the same thing, if they're basically part and parcel, the same actual political entity, I'm just going to vote for the other one. I'm going to keep switching my allegiance until I get what I want. That is success. That is the true union of the people that I believe is going to lead us into the 21st century. We are not close to fighting a civil war. The division that you see on your television, on your device, is manufactured. It's a fabrication. In the immortal words of Flava Flav, don't believe the hype.
Act 2, there's profit to be made in this Civil War talk.
Another reason I can be so optimistic about the future and also believe that this nation having a national divorce, much less a civil war, is complete and total nonsense is the volume of money that's being generated in that paradigm. And the fact that when there is that much money, there is that much energy, attention naturally follows. And our attention, our collective consciousness is now waking up to what an industry this tempest is, this cauldron of anger and separation. A couple of different stories have come out that have illustrated how much money is behind these scenes and how much the actors within these, at least by way of this example or these examples, the political paradigms are really driven by money, not by ideology, not by any chief goal or aim to make things better in this country. The first story that caught my eye was this very interesting dynamic between Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro. So if you're not aware, Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro are luminaries within the conservative movement, particularly this online social media presence that is so important in the 21st century. And I'm not a follower of either one of them. I'm aware of Ben Shapiro because he has been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He has been in interviews with Jordan Peterson, and I listen to Joe Rogan. I love in particular when he has other comedians on his podcast. He has a number of political and social luminaries on his podcast as well. I mean, it's the number one podcast in the country. And Jordan Peterson, although I disagree with some of the things that he says, I find him a compelling speaker, even when I don't agree. Ben Shapiro, on the other hand, I do get frustrated listening to him because I do find it more partisan and I find it more tribal, even though I think he's a very intelligent person. Well, because of his tangential relationship to people that I do follow, I became aware of the fact that his organization, the Daily Beast, had made an offer to another conservative icon in the social media space, in the podcasting space, a guy named Steven Crowder, who I wasn't really aware of at all. Now, that's an important element of this story, that I wasn't aware of him at all. Again, I'm probably the last to know when it comes to social media, when it comes to who are the luminaries in any particular space. But this, I felt like, was different because Ben Shapiro had made to Steven Crowder a $50 million offer to have his podcast and his platform move over to the Daily Beast. And I believe the contract was for 3 years. $50 million for 3 years. For that kind of money, I feel like, as someone who is a podcaster, who does keep up with podcasting, who is trying to, as much as he can, identify and speak to issues that are in the popular cultural lexicon so I can promote this podcast. No, I'm not trying to chase clicks, but I am trying to be aware. It surprised me that I was not aware of a conservative social media podcaster such that he could warrant $50 million from another platform for only 3 years. Now, I have no doubt that Ben Shapiro, in all of the different social media outlets that he has created and that are generating traffic through this Daily Beast, or I'm sorry, I've said that, I think, twice, and I'm not going to edit it out. It's called the Daily Wire, not the Daily Beast. The Daily Wire, not the Daily Beast. The presence that Ben Shapiro has created through the Daily Wire, I have no doubt, is great. Is it so great that it's able not only to generate such profits that it can support all of the different podcast platforms and social media platforms it has, and then go out and acquire another one for $50 million and have that value add be so profitable that it warrants that $50 million, that it warrants, what is it, a little under $17 million a year, a little under $17 million a year. There has to be bigger money behind the Ben Shapiro platform, behind the Daily Wire, right? I mean, we're never going to get to see them open their books, but it seems logical that in order to warrant that kind of offer, there has to be private money behind the Daily Wire. And given that it is so partisan an organization, that it is in that political sphere, you have to think that it is ideological money. That regardless of whether or not the money is warranted, it's the ideas that are important. It's the ideas that are at stake. What are those ideas? About separation? About discord? About a potential civil war? If you're not with me, you're against me. That if you're in support of this liberal cause, that you are part of a problem that is destroying this country. There's a lot of money in that. If you think that this country is literally falling apart, prior to any action of violence, you're going to act with your money, aren't you? You're going to actually take your money and support causes that are going to save this country, save the democracy. There's economic power in this national divorce talk, this Civil War talk. It's not us, it's the system, or it's them, it's the other political party. It draws in like a black hole our attention, it draws in like a black hole our money. Yet ideologically, do they believe it? Do the people, the proponents of this national divorce, of this civil war, do they actually believe what they are purveying? That brings me to the second story I wanted to comment on, and the fact that, again, I'm very optimistic about the future of this country, and I'm also very optimistic that we're nowhere near having any kind of national divorce or civil war because of the rise of the consciousness. These things get out, information gets out, and we're starting to better see how separation and discord are being sold to us. Again, being sold to us. It's the stories that broke from Fox News and the lawsuit that was filed by Dominion over the voting machines. If you are unaware, Dominion, the company responsible for the voting machines in a number of states, this company sued Fox News for defamation, slander, over the reporting on the alleged voter fraud. And in the lawsuit, of course, there is discovery. And in discovery, there is many a paper that is exchanged between the parties. You're able to go in and request emails. You're able to go in and request all sorts of documents that were contemporaneous to Fox News and its coverage of the election, the story as to whether or not the voting machines had been tampered with, whether or not you can even call that a story. In the discovery were texts between high-profile pundits, no, I will not call them journalists, at Fox News, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, and two main angles, two main positions came out in these text messages. A, that Tucker Carlson in particular did not believe these Dominion news stories that there was any evidence whatsoever that they had been tampered with or that the vote had been tampered with. Yet, the second element, the second angle, the second position, our viewers believe it. And if they do, and Fox News stops pushing these types of stories, we're going to lose viewers. That would be bad for the network. It would be bad for us individually and our individual shows. As with the Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder story, it's the money. And it's the money behind this separation, this discord. It actually sells so well to so many people that it has to continue to be promoted, even if it's ridiculous. I can give you a quick analogy on how this works. I've been working with people who have tried to help me promote my podcast, and one of the things that they will tell me, and it's consistent among different types of people in different types of podcasting segments or industries, you don't need a lot of listeners. You don't need a lot of supporters. You just need loyal supporters. If you had 1,000 people giving you $25 a month, the podcast would be not just sustainable, it would be profitable. When it comes to the ideologies, when it comes to the ideas, it pays to get people separated. It pays to sow discord because those on the fringe of the separation and the discord will put their dollars into those ideas, into those ideologies. You don't need a lot of them. You just need them to be dedicated. It's the same thing in gaming. It's the same thing in pornography. You don't need a lot of subscribers. You don't need a lot of people putting their money and their energy and attention into those things, into politics, into religion, into social issues. What you need is people dedicated to doing so every month. And that pool of people may be small, but if they're loyal, it's profitable. Do the Fox News pundits really believe what they say? Very likely not. Do they see the numbers, their viewership, after these segments where they say ridiculous things, after these episodes where they say ridiculous things? Yes, they do. And if the response warrants them saying it again, they will. They don't need a large audience. They don't need a ton of people. What they need is dedicated audiences. What they need is this select few people that will support them unconditionally. Ideas be damned. Ideology be damned. That brings me to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Occasionally, and I don't want to speak to the most recent incident because this is consistent. It's something that works for her. She'll come out and say something to the effect that there needs to be a national divorce or that we're heading for a civil war. And if you look back at the history, you can Google it, you'll see she said this more than once. And every time that she does, it promotes her into the national spotlight. And it occurred to me when I was considering how I was going to approach this segment, who's behind that? In other words, what kind of money and attention is she generating by getting herself in a national spotlight, saying things to the effect of there needs to be a national divorce. There's this blue-red divide in the United States. Being promoted on a national platform, she is obviously able to reach a nationwide audience of people that may be giving her money. And that money may not be coming out of the pockets of people who are making, as a household, less than $100,000 a year, although I think that's very possible. She may be courting big money donors who like that message as well. We, as a consciousness in this country, are becoming more aware of the fact that most of the people who are spouting off that we need a national divorce and that there is a civil war coming are doing so only because it's profitable, only because it's putting money in their pocket. To the extent that they actually believe that, who knows? But when you've got people who can pay one another $50 million swimming in this conservative ideology of discord, when you have people who are making tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off of a story that's complete and total nonsense about the voting machines in the 2020 election, and when you have someone who can just spout off on occasion about a national divorce or a civil war in the United States and have that person promoted on a nationwide platform, it's the money, dear listener. And we shouldn't be persuaded by those ideologies, by those ideas, when the people who are promoting them are doing so because it is so profitable.
Act 3 # vote against the incumbent redo. Don't blame the politicians. Let's blame ourselves.
The final chapter in this episode about how things are much better than we perceive them to be, how I'm optimistic about the future of this country, in particular politically. It's the concept of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering political districts. Every time this topic is broached, there's this negative connotation about how the politicians, particularly bureaucrats within the political parties, within the state political machine, are rigging elections by gerrymandering political districts. And for those few who are not going to Google the word gerrymandering, it is just gerrymandering, gerrymandering. The concept was introduced into the political system for parity in minority voting. In other words, to create districts where minority voters could have an elected representative because the district was a majority of that minority vote, whether black, Asian, Hispanic. That concept was slowly rolled out to just simply gerrymander by a number of different factors, namely wealth and namely political affiliation. I always want to reinforce this on the podcast. When you do something, even for altruistic reasons, there's generally a consequence. There's a cause and there's an effect. In this context, when it comes to political districts, you had people with the best of intentions trying to increase the amount of minority representation in this country, what happened? Enterprising bureaucrats, creative, progressive bureaucrats said, well, we can do this for minority voters, or we can do this for class, wealth, and in particular, political affiliation. And that's what they did. You have districts now that are gerrymandered to the point where the representation of the actual population is in no way, shape, or form representative of who gets into office. And that can be both from the Democratic side and the Republican side. My favorite example of this is Austin, Texas, an enclave of liberalism in the middle of one of the most conservative states. If you look at the representation in and around Austin, it's all Republican. They're all Republicans. And if you look at the way that the districts are gerrymandered, they actually look like the spoke of a wheel. In other words, the center of Austin is the middle of that spoke, and there are slices that go out in and around the suburban and then the rural areas of that part of Texas. So you have residents in and around Austin voting in these elections, many of whom are Republican, and then you have the people in Austin, in the center of Austin, who are very liberal. Well, the powers that be in the state bureaucratic machine have measured, they have weighed, they have done their surveys and statistics, and they have fashioned these gerrymandered districts such that there isn't a Democratic representative for the House of Representatives of the United States Congress in or around the city of Austin, Texas. Think about that. So how could this condition, how could this circumstance lead me to be optimistic? Well, quite simple. We make the choices that we make, and we suffer the consequences that we suffer. Look at what gerrymandering is generally based on now. It's based on political affiliation. You have bureaucrats in both parties looking at geographic maps, looking at voting history, and carving up these districts based on who people vote for and where they live. And we, as a people, are so married to whether or not we're going to vote R or D, that little letter next to somebody's name on a ballot, that politicians and bureaucrats can go and carve up these gerrymandered districts, and they work. Ponder that, dear listener. Feel into that. It's not them. We're not victims. They are market actors, these politicians, these bureaucrats. If they can go through a voting history and carve up a district, and it works, it continues to work. What do I mean by that? If you're a Republican, you're going to get a Republican candidate. If you're a Democrat, you're going to get a Democratic candidate. That our past history, our voting history, is so consistent, that we as a people are so consistent in who we are going to vote for, no matter who it is, no matter really what they do in substance. As long as they have that R next to their name, as long as they have their D on the ballot, we will vote for them. So who is that on? Is that on the politician or the bureaucrat? Or is that on we the people, the voters that go to the ballot box? What is the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. This is insanity. The way we view our political system is insanity. We are so frustrated and we have so many demands of the political system, but when it gets right down to it, you can look at these gerrymandered political districts and the people within them are going to vote for the R or they're going to vote for the D, just like they have in the past 5, 10, 20 elections. That, in my mind, is why, in substance, the political parties are no longer different. The Democrats, the Republicans, it's all the same thing. In substance, you get nothing different. Procedurally, it makes a big show to go out and argue over identity politics. It's all a big circus. Substantively, what's really different? What really changes? Substantively, what needs to change? If you're going to vote for the Republican anyway, if you're going to vote for the Democrat anyway, what substantively do they need to do differently? Absolutely nothing. Harken back to season 2, at the end, I had a couple of episodes, maybe 3, where I started talking about vote against the incumbent. Hashtag vote against the incumbent. When it comes to gerrymandering, it should not be a concern of ours. Why? Because we have the power to vote against an incumbent or vote for another political party. That's what's so ironic, if you will, about this entire condition that we have in this country, this political condition, that we feel like we're trapped, that the only way that we can get out is if we completely destroy and remake the political system, or, God forbid, that we engage in a civil war. And yet the solution is extremely simple. It's a bloodless coup. Vote against the incumbent. If you want to send a message to those that gerrymander the districts, if you want to send a message to the politicians that in substance are exactly alike, they're identical, the easiest way to do that is to vote against the incumbent. Are we willing as a people to get out of the insanity, to stop, to refuse, to engage in this same energy that we've been in of separation, of discord, of allowing politicians that only in procedure, that only procedurally are different from one another, arguing about identity politics in order to distract us from the real issues? As I stated last season, in 6 short years, 6 years, through employing vote against the incumbent, the entire government could be completely overturned. The 2 biggest counters to such an argument that I've heard from the few people that have actually responded, well, A, hey, nobody's going to know what they're doing if you don't have anybody in the House or in the Senate that has any experience. And B, whatever your political persuasion, I'm not voting to have those nut jobs take power in the Senate, in the House, in the White House. Let's address both. First, they don't know what they're doing. Well, do the people who've been in there for 30 years know what they're doing? Yes, they do. And what are they doing? They're obfuscating. They're doing all of the things that we don't want them to do. I'm not sure that we'd have any worse result by a bunch of freshmen in the House or Senate versus what we have now. And the second argument is another reason why I'm so optimistic about the future of this country and the future of the political system. Well, I'm not going to vote for those nut jobs to take over. Look at how closely divided the House and the Senate are right now. People are waking up. The consciousness is rising that the political parties are really one and the same, that we're not getting any substantive difference. So people now are demanding more of the politicians from each political party and are willing, more and more people, willing to vote across the aisle, so to speak, because the party in power is not doing anything to serve the people. How closely divided both the Senate and the House are is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a great sign that we are making progress. And to the extent that one is afraid of voting across the aisle, of voting for the other party, what really would be accomplished if you flip the script in either the House or the Senate right now? The margins are so close that over the course of 6 years, what really is at risk? In my mind, there's much more to be gained in that short a period of time than there is risk that having one political party or the other take over a chamber of Congress or the White House is going to provide some dystopian opportunity for one party or the other to destroy this country. Neither of these parties, neither of the politicians within these parties, nor the bureaucrats are capable enough to destroy this country. This country has been through much harder times than we have right now, and it very likely will undergo much harder times than we have right now. It has survived. It is surviving. It is going to survive, if not thrive. Would you, dear listener, like to hasten this process? Would you like to see the progress that we all imagine is possible occur right now? It's simple. Vote against the incumbent. Hashtag vote against the incumbent. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.